There's a particular kind of silence that follows a man out of a building and into the rest of his life. Not the silence of emptiness, the silence of too much understanding arriving all at once. He had walked in holding flowers. He walked out holding nothing. And the strange thing is, he didn't cry until 3 days later, when he found the vase he had bought for her birthday still sitting on the kitchen counter, still waiting. This is the story of Daniel Hargrove and his wife, Priya Hargrove. They had been married for 7 years, long enough for routines to feel like comfort, and long enough for comfort to quietly become invisibility. Daniel was a man who showed love through small, steady actions, a cup of tea left on her desk without being asked, a jacket placed over her shoulders before she knew she was cold. Priya was brilliant and restless, someone who needed to feel seen in the way that rooms noticed her. And Daniel, over time, had learned to admire her without always saying so out loud. That silence which he thought was devotion, she sometimes felt as distance. Neither of them spoke about this directly. They were too careful with each other, and perhaps too proud. What lived between them was never loudly broken. It simply grew quieter year after year, like a song playing in another room. They lived in a mid-sized house on Ellerton Street, with a back garden that Daniel maintained on weekends, and a kitchen Priya rarely cooked in anymore. That wasn't a complaint, it was simply true. Life had arranged itself into patterns. Daniel worked as a structural engineer at a firm downtown. Priya had been promoted 18 months earlier to senior account director at Callaway Communications, a role that came with longer hours, a new wardrobe, and an energy Daniel hadn't seen in her since early in their marriage. He noticed it and felt glad for her. He told her so. "You seem happy," he said one evening as she stood at the mirror, finishing an earring before a client dinner. "I feel useful," she said. Then, softer, "It's a good feeling." He understood that. He didn't ask further. Their mornings were synchronized like two instruments that had learned to play the same song without needing to look at the sheet music. Coffee made before alarms. A second cup left on the counter for whoever was running late. The dog, a sandy-colored terrier named Biscuit, walked between 6:15 and 6:45. Breakfast either together or not at all. The routines were gentle. They had never stopped being gentle people with each other. That, at least, remained. But there were hairline cracks, the kind only visible in certain light. Priya had started staying later at the office. Not alarmingly late, but later. She would text him, presentation pushed. "Don't wait up." And he wouldn't wait up. He would fall asleep on his side of the bed with the lamp off. And sometimes he would wake at midnight to find her already there, already turned away from him, her breathing slow and even. He never asked about her evenings in detail. He trusted her. That trust was not blind. It was deliberate. He had chosen it. On weekends, she was present but elsewhere. She laughed at the right moments during films. She passed the salt before he asked. But sometimes he would catch her staring past the window at something he couldn't name, and when he said her name gently, she would blink back and smile the way people do when they've been somewhere inside themselves that they're not ready to share. There was a colleague she mentioned occasionally. His name was Owen Callaway. Yes, the managing director's son, though she didn't emphasize it that way. She mentioned him in passing, the way you mention weather. Owen pushed the deadline back, which actually helped. Or Owen pulled everyone together for drinks after the Delaney pitch. It was nice. The name appeared in her sentences with the casual frequency of someone she simply worked beside, nothing more. Daniel met him once, briefly, at a firm Christmas gathering in December. Owen was tall, well-dressed, easy with people, the kind of man who made conversation feel effortless without seeming to try. He shook Daniel's hand and said, "You're the engineer. Priya speaks highly of you." Daniel thanked him and thought nothing more of it. That night, driving home, Priya was quiet in the passenger seat. Not unhappy quiet, just quiet. The city moved past the windows and slow orange light. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Daniel asked. "I think so," she said. He reached over and rested his hand on hers on the center console. She turned her hand over so their palms were together, a small thing, an old reflex of theirs. They drove the rest of the way home like that, hand in hand, without saying anything else. It was a tender moment. He would remember it later and feel wrecked by it. January arrived cold and administrative. The new year settled over them the way it always did, with a brief, optimistic clarity that softened quickly back into ordinary life. Priya's hours stretched further. The Callaway Communications account with a new pharmaceutical client required late-night strategy sessions, weekend calls, a client dinner here and there. She told Daniel about these things in the tone of inconvenience, not apology, the way people describe logistics, not choices. He received each piece of information and filed it in the part of himself that wanted to believe the best. But something had begun shifting beneath that belief. He couldn't name it, not yet. It was textural, the way certain fabrics feel different even before you see them clearly, a change in her attention. Not absence, exactly. Priya was still there, still asking about his projects, still folding his laundry into neat stacks on the chair by the window. But the quality of her presence had altered. She was with him and slightly beyond him at the same time, like she was listening to him through a wall. He caught himself making small tests, the kind he would have been embarrassed to admit to anyone, leaving a pause in conversation to see if she would fill it, mentioning something personal and watching how long she held it. She passed. She always passed. And yet, the feeling persisted. One Wednesday evening, she came home later than expected, and when he looked up from his book and said, "Long one?" she smiled and said, Owen had ideas about the campaign direction that needed working through. She went upstairs without sitting beside him. He heard the shower run for a long time. He sat with his book open on his lap. He hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. The name Owen had now accumulated a kind of gravity in Daniel's mind that he did not want it to have. He felt embarrassed by his own suspicion. He thought of himself as a reasonable man, and reasonable men, he believed, did not construct elaborate doubts from second-hand impressions. He had no evidence. He had only a feeling, and feelings were unreliable. He thought about Priya at 28, the first time she'd come to his flat for dinner and corrected his pronunciation of something, and then looked mortified at herself. And they had both left until the pasta overcooked. He thought about how she had held his hand in the hospital waiting room when his mother had her surgery, how she had cried quietly at their wedding, not from sentiment, she said, but from relief, as though she had been waiting her whole life to finally be somewhere she meant to stay. Those memories were real. He held them up against the present and asked himself what they were worth. He decided to stop doubting her. He made that decision firmly and privately, the way men do when they know the doubt is already lodged too deep to fully dislodge. In late February, on a Thursday afternoon, something happened at his own office. A project completed unexpectedly early. A rare clearing in the middle of a working day. He sat in the released quiet of it and thought, I should surprise her. He had not done something like that in years. Something small and warm and unscheduled. He knew a florist near her building. Tulips, she had always liked tulips over roses, and a Thai place on the same street that did the noodle dish she ordered every time they went. He texted no one. He simply left. Standing in the flower shop holding a bundle of yellow and pale peach tulips wrapped in brown paper, he felt suddenly lighter. This was the version of himself he wanted to be, the man who showed up. He bought the flowers and the food and walked toward her building with something loosening in his chest, something that felt almost like hope. That feeling would be the last uncomplicated thing he felt for a very long time. The lobby of Callaway Communications occupied the ground floor of a glass and steel building on Merchant Avenue. The receptionist, a young woman named Tamsin, who had seen Daniel once before at the Christmas event, looked up when he pushed through the revolving door. Something moved across her face, just briefly. A micro-shift. She smiled immediately after, but the pause had already happened. Daniel. Hi. Is Priya expecting you? No, I thought I'd surprise her, he said, lifting the flowers slightly, smiling. Oh. Another pause. She might be in a meeting. Let me call through. She picked up the desk phone. He watched her angle herself slightly away as she spoke, not so much that it seemed deliberate, but enough. She kept her voice low. He heard, yes. Right. Okay. She turned back with a composed expression and said, she's just finishing up. I'll take you through. He followed Tamsin down a corridor he had not been down before, past the oaken plan floor where a few people glanced up and then glanced away, with that same quality of careful neutrality that he now noticed as a pattern rather than coincidence. Tamsin paused outside a closed door. She said, I'll just let her know you're. But Daniel had already reached for the handle, not aggressively. He simply opened it, the way you open any door in a building where you have no reason to feel unwelcome. The room was a small conference space, round table, 4 chairs, a projector screen that was dark. Priya was standing near the window. Owen Calloway was standing close to her, closer than the room required. Priya's hand was on his forearm, not gripping it, just resting there. The way you touch someone you have been touching for a while. When the door opened, they separated with a physical swiftness that was itself an answer to every question Daniel had refused to ask himself for the past 2 months. Priya saw him. The color left her face. Daniel did not shout. He did not step further into the room. He stood in the doorway with the tulips in one hand and the bag of food in the other, and he looked at his wife, and she looked back at him, and the silence between them was enormous and complete. Owen started to say something. But Daniel turned his eyes to him once, briefly, and whatever Owen saw there made him stop. Daniel looked at Priya again. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. He set the flowers down on the small table just inside the door. He set the food bag beside them. He straightened up. He held her gaze for one more moment. Not in anger, not in accusation. In something closer to sorrow. As if he were committing her face to memory for a reason he didn't want to name yet. Then he left. He walked back through the corridor, past the open floor, through the lobby. Tamsin said something behind him, his name. Perhaps, but it didn't reach him. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped back out onto Merchant Avenue and stood on the pavement while the city moved around him. 3 days later, he moved the last of his immediate necessities to his brother's spare room. He did not leave a note. He didn't need to explain. The tulips had explained everything. Priya called. He let the calls reach voicemail. He wasn't ready to speak. He wasn't sure when he would be. 6 months passed in the particular way that months pass after a life breaks open, not quickly and not slowly, but with an uneven rhythm that sometimes felt like recovery and sometimes felt like walking a circle. Priya stayed in the house on Ellerton Street. She kept Biscuit, who seemed to spend the first several weeks waiting near the front door in the evenings. She threw herself back into work with the focused desperation of someone who needed to be occupied at all costs. She stayed late not because of meetings now, but because she could not bear the quality of the evening silence in the house. The thing with Owen had not survived what happened in that conference room, whatever it had been, and she spent considerable private time trying to characterize it honestly. It had not been equal to what it cost. That clarity arrived slowly and painfully, the way clarity usually does when it arrives too late. Owen had been attentive in the way that felt like oxygen after a long time in a room with too little air. He noticed her ideas before she finished articulating them. He told her she was remarkable in the casual, assured tone of someone who believed it completely. She had let herself want that. She had told herself it was harmless for longer than it was. She did not perform regret to anyone except herself. She had too much pride for that. She told her closest friend, Nadia, what had happened, and Nadia listened without judgment. And Priya found that worse than judgment, somehow. It made her own reflection clearer. She went to therapy. A woman named Dr. Akonkwo, quiet and patient, who asked questions that Priya noticed were deceptively simple. In those sessions she began, slowly, to dismantle the story she had been telling herself. That the distance in her marriage had been Daniel's creation, that his steadiness had become suffocation, that she had simply needed more than he knew how to give. Dr. Okonkwo did not argue with this. She simply asked, "Did you tell him what you needed?" The answer was the kind that sits in the chest and refuses to be comfortable. She hadn't, not directly, not with the honest, vulnerable language that might have reached him. She had waited for him to notice, and when he noticed in the way he knew how, tea on the desk, jacket on her shoulders, his palm against hers in the car, she had felt it was not quite enough, and she had let that quiet grievance accumulate in the dark without ever turning the light on it. She began writing letters she never sent, long ones sometimes, not to Daniel, not directly, more to herself, working out what she believed, what she regretted, what she understood now that she had not understood before. Daniel, meanwhile, was not loudly rebuilding, he was quietly excavating. He stayed with his brother Finn for the first 2 months, helping Finn with a renovation project, which gave his hands something to do and his mind a rhythm. He cooked meals for Finn's family. He went for long walks with no particular direction. He stopped doing the thing he used to do where he catalogued his feelings into useful and not useful. He just let them be present, whatever they were. He began to notice that he was not, underneath the grief, a man who had been asleep. He had seen things. He had chosen to interpret them generously. There was something in him that wanted to call that a mistake. But when he sat with it long enough, he thought that maybe it wasn't. Maybe being the kind of man who extends trust is not the same as being naive. He had been who he was. That had its own integrity. Priya reached out in August. A simple message, "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. You deserved better." He read it several times over several days. In September he replied, "Thank you. I'm still working through things. I'll be in touch." She held her phone and felt the smallness and the enormity of that message in equal measure. It was not forgiveness. It was not a door closing. It was something more difficult, the truth of where they both were. A week later, he asked if she would meet him for coffee. They met at a place called The Granary, a small cafe on a side street neither of them had history with. Neutral ground. He revived first and sat facing the door, not out of nervousness but out of the old habit of watching for her. She came in wearing a gray coat he didn't recognize. She had cut her hair slightly shorter since he'd last seen her. She looked like herself, and also like someone who had been through something. He imagined he looked the same to her. She sat down. They ordered coffee. There was a moment before either of them spoke where they simply occupied the same space and let that be what it was. "You look well," she said. "I'm getting there," he said. She nodded. She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I've been thinking about what I want to say to you for months. Now I'm here, and I'm not sure any of it comes out the way I practiced it." "That's all right," he said. "You don't have to perform it." She looked at him. "I didn't tell you what I needed. I waited for you to figure it out. And when you didn't, not in the way I wanted, I convinced myself that meant something was wrong with us. Something structural." She paused. "It wasn't. It was me. I needed to use my voice, and I didn't." He listened to her, not with the careful listening of a man waiting for his turn to speak. Real listening. She could feel the difference. "I know we can't go back," she continued. "I'm not asking to go back." "What are you asking?" he said gently. She considered this with the honesty it deserved. "I think I'm asking for you to know that I saw it clearly, eventually, that I know what I cost us." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the street moved in its ordinary September way, people passing, a bus pulling away from a stop, the sky holding its pale autumn light. "I spent a long time thinking about what I should have done differently," he said. "Whether I should have pushed more, asked more, made you feel more." He stopped. "But I've started to think that's not entirely the right question. We were two people who stopped reaching toward each other at the same time, for different reasons. I stopped saying the thing I noticed. You stopped saying the thing you needed. The gap grew in both directions." She looked at her cup. "That's generous." "It's honest," he said. The silence that followed wasn't the terrible silence of the conference room doorway. It was a different kind. The quieter silence of two people who had finally said the true things and were now simply sitting inside them. After a while, she said, "Are you happy? We're getting there?" He thought about it properly the way she'd asked it. Getting there, he said. Genuinely? She smiled. A small, real smile, not performing, just present. Me too. They finished their coffee. They said goodbye on the pavement outside with the careful warmth of people who had once been each other's home and were now learning what to be instead. He watched her walk toward the corner. She didn't look back, and he didn't need her to. He stood there for a moment in the cool morning air, the city doing what cities do, indifferent, continuous, alive. He thought about the tulips he had set on that small table inside a door he should never have needed to open. He thought about the hand-holding in the car, their palms together, the quiet drive home. He thought about all the moments that had been exactly what they appeared to be, and all the ones that hadn't been, and how impossible it sometimes is to know the difference from inside a life. He put his hands in his pockets and walked, not away from something, not towards something specific, just forward, just himself, just the ordinary, irreplaceable business of continuing. And somewhere inside that walk, quiet and unhurried and entirely his own, something that had been braced for a very long time finally, gently, let go.